We wondered what happened to the kid from high school. Turns out, he faked his identity and was hiding from a massive financial scandal. Every high school has that one kid who seems destined for greatness, the valedictorian who gets into Harvard, the star athlete who goes professional, the tech genius who'll probably invent the next Facebook. At Riverside High School in Sacramento, that kid was definitely Brandon Chen. He was brilliant, charismatic, and had this uncanny ability to make money from seemingly nothing, even as a teenager. I remember sitting behind him in AP Economics our senior year, watching him day trade on his phone during Mr. Peterson's lectures about market fundamentals. While the rest of us were struggling to understand basic supply and demand curves, Brandon was already making hundreds of dollars a day playing the stock market with money he'd earned from various side hustles. Chen's going to be a millionaire before he's 25, my friend Mike whispered during one particularly boring class about fiscal policy. Kids got the Midas touch. He wasn't wrong. By graduation, Brandon had already launched 2 successful online businesses, a tutoring service that connected high-achieving students with struggling ones, and some kind of cryptocurrency mining operation that he ran out of his parents' garage. He drove a BMW to school, wore designer clothes, and always seemed to have cash for whatever he wanted. But what really set Brandon apart wasn't just his business acumen, it was his personality. He was genuinely likable, generous with his success, and never made anyone feel inferior despite clearly being on a different level than the rest of us. He helped classmates with their college application essays, threw epic parties at his house when his parents were out of town, and always picked up the tab when a group of us went out to dinner. The thing about Brandon, our mutual friend Sarah said during one of those dinners, is that he makes everyone around him feel like they're part of something bigger. Like his success is our success too. That was exactly right. Being friends with Brandon felt like being given a glimpse into a future we could all aspire to, wealth without arrogance, success without selfishness. He was proof that you could make money and still be a good person, that ambition didn't have to come at the expense of friendship. When we graduated in 2015, everyone expected to keep hearing about Brandon's accomplishments. He'd gotten into Stanford's business program with a full scholarship, and his high school businesses were already generating enough revenue to pay for his expenses. He was the kind of person you expected to see on magazine covers someday, featured in articles about young entrepreneurs who were changing the world. But then, nothing. For the first year after graduation, Brandon stayed in touch sporadically through social media. He posted photos from Stanford, updates about new business ventures, the occasional nostalgic comment about missing high school friends. But gradually, his online presence began to fade. Posts became less frequent, then stopped altogether. His social media accounts went dormant, and when classmates tried to reach out to him directly, messages went unanswered. "Anyone heard from Brandon lately?" became a common question at our informal college break reunions. Nobody had. It was like he'd simply vanished from the digital world, which seemed especially strange for someone who'd built his teenage empire through online businesses. By our 2-year reunion in 2017, Brandon's absence had become a genuine mystery. Our class had stayed relatively connected through social media and group chats, but Brandon was the notable exception. Some people speculated that he'd gotten so successful that he'd outgrown his high school connections. Others worried that something had happened to him, an accident, family problems, or worse. "Maybe he's gone full tech billionaire," joked our former class president, Jessica. "Too busy changing the world to keep up with us normal people." "Or maybe he's in witness protection," added Mike, though he was laughing when he said it. We had no idea how close to the truth that second guess actually was. The mystery deepened when several classmates tried to look him up during college. Stanford had no record of a Brandon Chen in their business program. The tutoring service he'd founded had disappeared entirely, with its website leading to a dead link. Even the business license for his cryptocurrency operation had been filed under a name none of us recognized. "It's like he never existed," Sarah said during one of our group video calls junior year. "I'm starting to wonder if Brandon Chen was even his real name." "Don't be ridiculous," I replied. "We went to school with him for 4 years. We knew his parents, went to his house, saw his report cards. Of course Brandon Chen was his real name." But Sarah's comment planted a seed of doubt that grew larger with each passing year. How does someone just disappear so completely in the digital age? How does a person leave no trace, especially someone who'd been so successful and well-known in high school? The answer came 5 years later, in 2020, during what should have been our 5-year reunion. The event was cancelled due to COVID-19, but our class had organized a virtual reunion instead. About 30 of us were on a Zoom call, sharing updates about jobs, relationships, and life after college, when Sarah dropped a bombshell that left everyone speechless. "Guys," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "I think I found Brandon." But it's not good news. She'd been working as a financial journalist in San Francisco when she stumbled across a news story that made her blood run cold. The FBI had arrested a 23-year-old man named David Liu in connection with a massive Ponzi scheme that had defrauded investors of over $50 million. The photo accompanying the article showed a face that was unmistakably our former classmate, though he looked older, thinner, and was wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of the designer clothes we remembered. "That's definitely Brandon," Mike said, staring at the screen where Sarah had shared the article. "But who the hell is David Liu?" The article painted a picture that was both fascinating and terrifying. David Liu had allegedly been running a sophisticated investment fraud operation for over 3 years, promising clients extraordinary returns through a proprietary trading algorithm that didn't actually exist. Instead of investing their money, he'd been using new investors' funds to pay fake returns to earlier investors while siphoning millions for his own use. According to this, Sarah continued, David Liu has been living under multiple false identities for years. The FBI thinks his real name might not even be David Liu, that could be just another alias. "So Brandon Chen was a fake identity too?" asked Jessica. "That's what it looks like. The timeline matches up perfectly. This David Liu person supposedly started his investment business right around the time Brandon disappeared from social media." The more we read about the case, the more disturbing it became. David Liu had created an elaborate web of false companies, fake credentials, and manufactured testimonials to convince wealthy investors to trust him with their money. He'd lived in luxury penthouses in San Francisco and Los Angeles, driven exotic cars, and maintained the lifestyle of a successful fund manager while systematically stealing from his clients. But perhaps most unsettling was the realization that the Brandon Chen we'd known and admired in high school had apparently been practicing the same kind of deception on a smaller scale. Those successful businesses we'd envied? The tutoring service that seemed too good to be true? The cryptocurrency operation that generated mysterious profits? "I'm starting to think Brandon's high school businesses were just training for the big con," I said, feeling sick to my stomach. "He was perfecting his technique on us." Over the next few days, several of us dug deeper into the story, trying to piece together how our charismatic classmate had become an alleged financial criminal. What we discovered was a pattern of escalating fraud that had apparently started even before high school. The tutoring business, it turned out, had been generating revenue not through legitimate tutoring services but through a complex scheme involving fake academic credentials and plagiarized assignments. Students weren't just paying for help with their homework, they were unknowingly participating in an academic fraud operation that sold completed assignments to multiple clients. The cryptocurrency mining operation was even more sophisticated. Rather than actually mining cryptocurrency, David had been running what amounted to a micro-Ponzi scheme, using new investors' money to pay returns to earlier investors while skimming profits for himself. The fact that cryptocurrency was poorly understood by most high school students had made it the perfect cover for his illegal activity. "He was literally practicing on us," Sarah said during another video call where we were all trying to process the revelation. "Our friend, our classmate, was using us as test subjects for financial crimes." The most disturbing part was how good he'd been at it. None of us had suspected anything because Brandon had been genuinely likable, generous, and appeared to be achieving his success through legitimate means. He'd shared his wealth, celebrated our successes, and maintained the facade of being a normal teenager who just happened to be extraordinarily gifted at business. "That's what makes him so dangerous," observed Mike. "He doesn't look like a criminal. He looks like the kind of person you'd want to trust with your money." As the federal case against David Liu proceeded, more details emerged that shed light on our former classmate's true identity. Court documents revealed that he'd been born Daniel Chen in Portland, Oregon, to parents who died in a car accident when he was 12. He'd spent several years bouncing between foster homes before somehow ending up in Sacramento with forged documents identifying him as Brandon Chen, the son of a fictional family. The foster care records showed a pattern of behavioral problems that had escalated over time: lying, theft, manipulation of authority figures, and an unusual ability to charm adults despite his criminal behavior. Social workers had noted his exceptional intelligence and his talent for creating elaborate stories that were just believable enough to avoid serious scrutiny. "He's been running cons since he was a kid," Sarah explained after reading through the court filings. "The Brandon Chen identity was probably just the most successful one. Even more shocking was the revelation that the house we'd all visited for Brandon's parties didn't belong to his parents. It belonged to an elderly couple who'd been traveling abroad for extended periods. Brandon had somehow gained access to the property and had been squatting there while maintaining the fiction that it was his family home. "Remember how his parents were never around?" Jessica asked. "We thought they were just really busy with work, but they never existed in the first place." The federal prosecution painted a picture of a young man who'd spent his entire adolescence perfecting the art of deception, using each successful con to build confidence and resources for increasingly ambitious schemes. The high school businesses weren't just practice runs, they were the foundation for a criminal empire that had grown exponentially once he'd gained access to more sophisticated victims. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of the case was the psychological profile that emerged during the trial. Expert witnesses testified that David Liu showed classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, with an exceptional ability to mimic normal emotional responses while feeling no genuine empathy for his victims. "He doesn't see other people as human beings," one forensic psychologist explained during testimony. "He sees them as resources to be exploited. The relationships he forms are entirely transactional, designed to gain trust that he can later exploit for financial gain." The trial became a media sensation, partly because of the scope of the fraud but mostly because of David Liu's age and apparent normalcy. Here was a young man who looked like he should be starring in a college recruitment video, not facing decades in federal prison for financial crimes. As his former classmates, we found ourselves in the bizarre position of being contacted by journalists, FBI agents, and lawyers who wanted to understand how we'd known the defendant. What had he been like in high school? Had we suspected anything? Did we feel like victims ourselves? That last question was particularly difficult to answer. Technically, those of us who'd used Brandon's tutoring service or invested pocket money in his cryptocurrency scheme had been defrauded. But the amounts were small enough that we'd never thought of ourselves as victims. More troubling was the realization that we'd been unknowing accomplices, providing social credibility that had helped Brandon perfect his persona. "I feel like an idiot," Mike said during one of our group calls. "All those times I told people how smart and successful Brandon was, I was basically providing character references for a criminal." "We all did," I replied. "That's what makes this so disturbing. He didn't just steal money, he stole our trust and used it to hurt other people." The victim impact statements during the sentencing phase were heartbreaking. Elderly couples who'd lost their retirement savings, young families who'd invested their children's college funds, small business owners who'd trusted David Liu with money meant for expansion and growth. The lives he'd destroyed were real and devastating, even if the relationships he'd formed to gain their trust had been entirely fabricated. One victim statement particularly haunted me. An elderly woman named Margaret Foster had invested her late husband's life insurance payout with David Liu, believing his promises that she could generate enough income to avoid selling the home she'd shared with her husband for 40 years. "He seemed like such a nice young man," she testified through tears. "He reminded me of my grandson, so polite and respectful. He talked about his college education, his family, his dreams for the future. I trusted him because he seemed so genuine, so honest." That description could have been written about the Brandon Chen we'd known in high school. The same charm, the same apparent sincerity, the same ability to make people feel special and included. The only difference was the scale of the deception and the severity of the consequences. David Liu was ultimately sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, though appeals and good behavior credits would likely reduce the actual time served. The judge noted that while the defendant's age was a mitigating factor, the sophistication and duration of his criminal enterprise warranted a substantial sentence. "The defendant has shown a disturbing pattern of antisocial behavior that began in adolescence and escalated to devastating criminal conduct," Judge Harrison stated during sentencing. The court is concerned about the likelihood of reoffense given the defendant's apparent inability to form genuine human connections or experience empathy for his victims. After the sentencing, several of us attended the hearing via video link, watching as our former classmate was led away in shackles. He showed no emotion, no remorse, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. It was like watching a stranger, someone who'd never really existed in the first place. "Do you think any of it was real?" Sarah asked afterward. "The friendship, the parties, the way he seemed to care about us?" "I don't think he's capable of real relationships," I replied. "I think everything was calculated, every interaction designed to build his credibility for future cons." The psychological evaluation that was part of his sentencing process supported that theory. David Liu scored extremely high on measures of intelligence and charm but showed no capacity for genuine emotional attachment. The evaluating psychologist described him as someone who could perfectly mimic normal social behavior while remaining fundamentally disconnected from other human beings. In the years since the trial, our high school friend group has struggled with the aftermath of discovering that someone we'd admired and trusted had been a sophisticated criminal. Some people felt angry and betrayed, others felt foolish for being deceived, and a few expressed sympathy for someone whose childhood trauma had apparently set him on a path toward antisocial behavior. "I keep thinking about the kid in foster care who lost his parents," Jessica said during one of our discussions. "Maybe if someone had gotten him help then, none of this would have happened. Or maybe he was always going to be a predator," Mike countered. "Some people are just wired differently, and no amount of therapy or intervention can change that." The truth was probably somewhere in between, but it didn't really matter anymore. Daniel Chen, Brandon Chen, David Liu, whatever his real name was, had made choices that devastated dozens of families and destroyed the trust of everyone who'd ever believed in him. The impact on our class went beyond just the shock of discovery. Several people struggled with trust issues in their personal and professional relationships, wondering if they could accurately judge people's character. Others became obsessed with researching acquaintances and colleagues, afraid of being deceived again. "He's poisoned our ability to trust our own judgment," Sarah observed. "If we couldn't tell that Brandon was a criminal when we knew him for 4 years, how can we trust our instincts about anyone else?" That paranoia wasn't entirely unjustified. If someone could maintain such an elaborate deception throughout high school, surrounded by peers and teachers who saw him daily, what did that say about our ability to recognize dangerous people in our lives? The media attention around the case gradually faded, but the questions it raised about trust, deception, and the nature of identity lingered. How well do we really know the people in our lives? How much of what we believe about others is based on carefully constructed performances rather than genuine character? 5 years after the trial, I still think about Brandon Chen sometimes, or whatever his real name was. I wonder if he feels any remorse for the lives he destroyed, or if he simply sees his conviction as the cost of doing business. I wonder if he's planning new cons from his prison cell, or if federal prison has finally broken his ability to manipulate and deceive. Most of all, I wonder about the other Brandon Chens out there, the charming sociopaths who are perfecting their techniques in high schools and colleges across the country, building trust and credibility that they'll eventually use to destroy innocent people's lives. Because if there's one thing I learned from this experience, it's that the most dangerous criminals don't look like criminals at all. They look like honor students and star athletes and successful entrepreneurs. They look like people you'd want to be friends with, people you'd trust with your money and your secrets. They look exactly like someone you'd want your daughter to date or your son to be. And that's what makes them so terrifyingly effective. Our 10-year reunion is coming up next year, and the planning committee has had long discussions about whether to acknowledge Brandon's absence or pretend he never existed. Some people want to include a memorial section for classmates we've lost, while others argue that a convicted felon doesn't deserve to be memorialized alongside classmates who've died from illness or accidents. "He's not dead," Mike pointed out during one planning meeting. "He's just in federal prison for destroying people's lives. There's a difference." In the end, we decided to simply not mention him at all. No memorial, no acknowledgement, no reference to the classmate who'd once seemed destined for greatness but had chosen criminality instead. It seemed like the most appropriate response to someone who'd spent his entire adolescence pretending to be someone he wasn't. But his absence will be felt anyway, because everyone who attended Riverside High School between 2011 and 2015 will remember the charming, successful student who'd seemed to have everything figured out. They'll remember the parties, the business ventures, the generous friend who always picked up the tab. And they'll wonder, as I still do, how many other Brandon Chens are out there right now, building trust and credibility in classrooms and dormitories across the country, preparing for the day when they'll cash in that goodwill for something much more sinister. The scariest part isn't that monsters exist, it's that some of them are so good at hiding that they can convince you they're heroes instead.